Can I just say, I love the music, both of you. Can I just say what an honor it is to be here for this transition, to be here for Dan Montgomery and all of what he has done for IFT. And I've seen IFT in its good days and its bad days. And Dan has been a remarkable leader. I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
And I also want to say, look at who and where are the other three officers?
Right there.
I saw one.
Punkett Sharma.
Punkett is over here. I'm not wearing my, there's John. Okay, all of you, this isn't my speech, but I'll do it now instead. The three of you, led by Stacy, look what has happened in terms of Illinois. Look what has happened in terms of Chicago. Look what all four of you are going to do in this moment. I just really want to say to both Dan and Stacy, you have all of our blessings, you have all of our commitment, and we are just rooting for you to kill it every single day. Dan just said he's not going anywhere, and I said, yes, I know that. Okay, I'm going to just put this down, can I? And what I'd like to do for a few minutes, I'm going to just move this. I'm sorry, I'm moving your whole, because, you know, I am short, you two are tall, so I'm just going to move your whole thing. Now, can you see me now? Okay. As long as they can see me now. You know, every school teacher in Para does this. You change things, you MacGyver things every single day, right? So I'm glad that I got here, even though I was sitting on the tarmac for about an hour. I'm glad that I got here to hear most of JB's, your governor's speech. I know that there are probably two people who are going to run from Illinois for the presidency of the United States. The one you just, I'm not endorsing anyone. The one you just saw today is a hell of a lot better than the other one. And you don't have to be from Local 1 to know that. I hope we can tweet that. He'll be really mad at me. So, you know, I wanted to say a thank you to Dan first. I just, you know, those phone calls that you get when all of a sudden, right before Christmas, Bruce Rauner thinks he's going to just basically kill the yeah? We all remember who Bruce Rauner is. Or a Paul Vallis. You know, joy is an act of spiritual and political resistance. So, but you know, you get those phone calls when a state president then says, oh, well, JB just cursed, so I can curse now, says, oh shit. And you're thinking, what the hell are we going to do? Like, how are we going to deal with this? And, you know, that, what Dan had to deal with in so many different ways, very much like Karen, Jesse, Stacy, other of the leaders in Chicago, frankly, I would argue Jackie Vaughn, in her generation, is this constant attempt to demonize the big city, to use the big city to say, oh, you in Peoria, you in Springfield, you don't like those people in the big city, and to use that and to try to create the us versus them in order for them to be able to distract and divide and give what they believe is the us for them all the goodies. And that's what Bruce Rauner tried to do in so many different ways. And it takes a lot of mettle to not only, and look, we tease about Local 1 and Local 2, but you can imagine being the president of the New York City Local in New York State, I lived through a lot of that same thing. And so you bringing the state together, making that fight together, hearing a JB talk about the entire state in this way, and looking at the state as a state, that's Dan Montgomery's brilliance. And I just wanted to say thank you. And I know, look, we have to, and Stacy talked a bit about the book that I wrote. I do love when all these people who exhibit fascistic behavior are shocked that we would define what fascistic behavior is, and then say to people, apply critical thinking, and you come to your own conclusions. Or in other words, if the shoe fits, you got it. But what he's doing about being at the library, the American Library Association, books are in some ways what happens in terms of how we teach history. Not just in classrooms, but generations to generations. It's not social media. It's how our elders at night reading to us, and us reading to others, and our kids and our grandkids, and then speaking of lived experience as we do this. Books, why would they? Why would they, in Kristallnacht, for those who remember German and Austrian history, why would they burn Jewish books? Why would the first thing that the Nazis do go and try to undermine any kind of sexual therapy?
We supported the genocide in Palestine. We supported the genocide in Palestine. Stop.
No, you can. Actually, I do not support Netanyahu, but I'd be happy to have that conversation with you afterwards. And if you want to have that conversation now instead of letting me do what I'm doing, that's fine too. Let me ask the rest of the room. Should I continue or no? Okay. And look, sir, whoever you are, I'd be happy to have that conversation with you. Because we have to deal with hard stuff. And we have to reject binaries. We have. Happy to talk to you about this afterwards. Happy. Okay, can I continue? Okay. So the issue about books, it's really important to have someone who is actually standing up against the erasure of history. And frankly, important to what our brother has just said, our sibling has just said, that there are not one view of history. There's not one view of current events. And we have an obligation as school teachers, and we have an obligation as librarians to be able to make sure that our children and our grandchildren know that. So I'm really glad that you're going to the Library Association. Now, for the rest of us who are staying here, the work that Stacy and the other 3 officers have to do going forward is really, it's almost a moment like never before. Yes, there have been really terrible moments in our history. And no doubt there will be really terrible moments that we have in the future. Much more terrible if we don't beat this authoritarian threat. But there will be really terrible moments. But this group of people who I just asked to stand before, they understand the assignment. I've watched them work. I've watched them bring people together. I've watched them hear people with different views of different things. I've watched them deal with the pain, and I've watched them come up with solutions. And you, my friend, Stacy, I was so honored to be with you last week in Chicago as masked agents were terrorizing people, were dragging people out of cars, were spraying clergy and teachers just down the street, pepper spraying. And I saw the same thing in Evanston, where I did an event and just heard people talk about the ICE agents right there. So I was actually not surprised at the huge No King's Day protest in Chicago yesterday. Or I had hoped we'd have millions of people, but that 7 million people showed up peacefully protesting. Thousands of events, big and small, across the country. Because there is a sense around the country, and I am around the country. I was in Portland. I don't want to do a travelogue, but I was in Portland on Thursday and Friday, and I got to Washington yesterday and here today. There is a sense that this is not America. This is not who we are. And our job, both in classrooms, but also very much on the streets, is to do what Stacy said in introducing me, connecting the dots and making sure people see that there is a path to change this. And not a path to a broken status quo, that the choice is not simply Trump's chaos and corruption and cruelty, or a broken status quo, but that through a labor movement, there is a path to something better, a path to actually creating a world where not just our members, not just a governor standing here telling teachers and paras that they're really important and he is going to protect them, but there is a path that every single working person in America, every single person in America, citizen and non-citizen alike, has a God-given right to a better life. That is what we do as a labor movement. If we work hard and fight and work and do the work we're trying to do in schools, in other work sites, people have a right to a fair wage. You don't clap for people having a right for a fair wage. People have a right to a decent retirement. People have a right to decent health care. This is not a radical view. This is what the American dream was supposed to be all about. And the problem we have, though, and you know it because you're living it. So I don't have to come to Chicago to talk about the problem that we have in terms of the president's power grab. I mean, just simply saying that a mayor of the city of Chicago or a governor of the state of Chicago should go to jail, oh wow, the governor of the state of Illinois, sorry. See, maybe I should be wearing my glasses and maybe I should be reading my speech. I mean, how is it that they indicted Tish James for nothing? Bolton, Comey, and God only knows who else. How is it that they would do what they did on Freaky Friday to Funston Elementary School? But the reason I'm hopeful, frankly, is not just because what we just did on No Kings. The reason I'm hopeful is when we were at Funston last week, and the chapter leader and the other teachers said, no, we're not putting up with this. It's not as if they weren't scared. And frankly, it's not as if I'm not scared. But they said, our job, this is not who we are. And we are going to find our courage, and we are going to find our compassion, and we're going to find our hope, and we're going to find our fight. And that is exactly what they did. That is why I am hopeful. I'm hopeful because our union is critical to this fight. And our union is critical to the fight to actually have the First Amendment right to free expression, so that someone in this room can say, Randi, I don't like what you're doing, and we have to respect that regardless of whether we agree or not. That is part of what free expression means. That is a fundamental right. But we, as labor and educators, we stand at the intersection of two of the three ways that people have power in the United States of America. Regular people only have power through politics, or through labor, or through education. And we stand at the intersection, I would say, probably of all three. So you wonder why we're being demonized? You wonder why people are attacking us? You wonder why fascists fear teachers? You wonder why fascists fear labor? Because they do not want to have regular people having a right. How dare they say that those of us that did no kings yesterday, how dare they say that we are terrorists? How dare they? But you know what they're doing. They're trying to create that kind of fear. They try to get people to stay home. Because what do authoritarians do? They want to create the isolation. They want to create the division. They want to create the fear. And in this country, they want to create the apathy. Like, oh, they're all the same. How many times have we heard others say that, or even in this room, we saying that, right? That is who they are. And that is who Trump is. And that is the fight that we are in. And so I want to just take a few minutes to basically just throw out a couple of ideas about what we do. Because if I leave you with anything, I leave you with the fact that they are intentional about all this. Why would a guy like Chris Rufo, who he calls himself a, quote, conservative activist, look at how they use the words of the left and of progressives to use it for themselves. And what did he say? After he tried to demonize Kim Crenshaw, who has done so much about critical race theory. After he tried to demonize every single university and university professor. What did he say? He said, the way you get to universal vouchers, meaning privatization, meaning it's not just taking the money from us, it's basically taking away a public school system, deconstructing the society so that there would be no public schools or that public schools would really flounder. He said the way you do that is, and I quote, create universal public school distrust. And that same speech, you have to be ruthless and brutal. So when they throw the spaghetti on the wall and they say, oh, this really works to divide people, and then all of a sudden you see that. So the bottom line is that is who they are. So the question for us is not only to complain about it, but the question for us is who are we? And I've talked a lot over the course of the last few months to actually suggest ways of fighting back. the number one way of fighting back is to be community. That is what King said in his last book, Chaos versus Community. He questioned, he said, if we want to actually avoid a life that we are now seeing, he said we have to be community. And we have to be community even when we disagree on an issue. And frankly, the gentleman who yelled at me, I don't disagree with him, but he thinks I do. Even when we disagree on an issue, we as a community, we as labor, we as educators, we end up becoming the foundation of what happens going forward. And so it's not just us, it's faith community, it's culture. How do we bring together so the next No Kings has 15 million people, not 7 million people? Number two, because that's what we do when we build a muscle. When people see each other out on the street together, we build a muscle together. We say we can do it. It is what South Korea did when they called martial law. And then everyone, hear what I'm saying, everyone stopped, went to Seoul, hundreds of thousands of people. They stopped the country. That didn't just, as Stacy just said, that didn't just happen out of thin air. It happened because of a lot of mobilizing and organizing beforehand. And that's part of what we're doing when we build the muscle to be out on the streets. But it's not just out on the streets. Yes, we have to use the courts. And just this week, just Friday, we won a case. How many people in the room still have student debt? We won a case that basically said, regardless of what you think you're doing, State Department of Education, you cannot stop screwing with the people who have, you cannot keep screwing with the people who have student debt. You must put all the student debt relief back up, and we are going to enforce it as part of that case that we won. But it's not just that. Think about Stacy's leadership in the fight. It's not just the courts. The courts slow things down. It's commerce. Think about Stacy's leadership in the Target fight. Think about the work that's gone on when people all throughout the country said, no, you're not taking Kimmel off the air, Disney. We want you to be more afraid of us, the consumers of Disney, than you are of Donald Trump. And so we have to be intentional about that kind of disruption. I'm not going to say more about that from this stage for all the obvious reasons. But then take John Miller, or then take what is going on right now. No, we should clap for John Miller. And because we have, good, we have so many of our colleagues in IFT who teach in universities. So one of the things that's happening right now is this loyalty oath. Have you heard about it? Yes. 9 universities were told, or were asked, said, you will get money. And this is because we have actually helped fight back on all of Trump's other ways of killing universities. 9 of them were told, if you agree to everything we say, then you will get whatever money you need. That's essentially the McCarthyite loyalty oath. Now, for the first time, the law firms didn't do this. The corporations didn't do this. They capitulated. Not all of them, but the first ones out of the box did. AUP, who is an affiliate of AFT, we worked really hard on these 9 campuses for a pushback. We've done it with all of you, the e-activists, all sorts of other things. Lots of professors like Tim Snyder read our e-activist in his Substack post, read it out loud. for all of his folks. We did it with alumni. We did it with students. This weekend we have lots of students meeting with AAUP and our folks in Philadelphia. And first, MIT said no. And then Brown said no. And then USC said no. And then Penn said no. And UVA said no. And Dartmouth said no. So 6 out of the 9 have now said no, Donald Trump. We are not going to agree to your loyalty oath, even though we're going to lose a shitload of money. That's what I mean when we're talking about organizing in the courts, in the court of public opinion, in commerce. It's slow. It's tough. But also in Congress. Look, you got a lot of people in the state who are basically in the House of Representatives who you agree with and we agree with and will do the right thing. And they're not in the majority. In the Senate, they're not in the majority. But I actually am very proud of them. And you all know I left the DNC. I'm still a Democrat. I wanted to be more independent. And you wanted me to be more independent. But look at what they're doing. And this is why I'm proud of them. They do not have the power to make things happen. We need to win the majority in the House of Representatives or in the Senate for them to have any power. Every civics teacher in this room knows that. But they used the limited power they had to say, no, you cannot keep on screwing people in America. These premium payments, I don't know how many of us in this room know people who are on Obamacare, but these premium payments in November go up, particularly in states that didn't expand Medicaid. So we're talking about not Illinois, not New York, not California. We're talking about the states where people are voting against their own people's best interest. And the states who are helping those folks are states like New York and Illinois and California. And we're saying there's 25 million people who are about to get really screwed. Their premium is going to go up 2 times, 3 times. And they said, no, we're going to make this fight. And they have to make this fight because people in America, including us, need to see people fighting back. Not just Mayor Brandon Johnson, not just IFT, but we need to see our elected officials fighting back. But the last thing I will say about that in terms of Congress is this. And they may not all, there's so many things that we wish they would do. But as we get closer to the 2026 election, if we don't have any power, just like all of you know this with a collective bargaining contract, in the absence of a collective bargaining contract, we almost have no rights. But we're always trying to make that collective bargaining contract better, not just in terms of pay, but in terms of rights, in terms of what happens in the community. So as we get closer and closer to the 2026 election, we got to make the contrast. We, nurses, teachers, are still the most trusted people in the country. We got to make the contrast. We got to get people off the couch. We got to get them into the voting booth. And we got to turn this country around. So, I'm going to end with this. There's a whole bunch of things we could do in terms of education. I could go on and on and on. You're going to do them. We're going to fight for that. You're going to fight in this state for the freedom that we need, the opportunity that we need. We're going to fight nationally for freedom and opportunity and dignity. But we got to get people, not just in this room, just like we did on No Kings. The same majority of people that voted for Brandon Johnson for mayor for the city of Chicago, we got to get them off the couch and in the voting booth. We got to get them off the couch and in the streets. We have to fight for an America that has dignity for all, that has opportunity for all. We have to fight unapologetically in terms of the work to make this country affordable. We have to fight unapologetically to make the promise of America real. That is who we are as teachers. That is who we are as unionists. That is who I saw Local 1 as and IFT as. Are you willing to do it? Are you willing to do it? Are you willing to take the assignment of the fight for hope over here? The fight for hope. The fight for aspiration. That is why I am hopeful. Thank you.
Dead wrong. What doesn't kill you